I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I was married to my childhood friend, who is 30 years old. We've known each other since we were 10 years old, but we didn't start dating until I was in my second year of college. After he finished college, he bought a house, and I moved in with him. We got married when I was 24, and now we have two boys, a 5 and 2-year-old. We've pretty much been living in the same house since college, but now we've bought a better one, and we're getting ready to move in. My husband is the only guy I've ever been with romantically, and our intimate life has always been steady. We used to have sex at least twice a week, which was quite frequent considering how long we've been together. My husband had a friend from college, let's call him Patrick. They were close during their college years and were even roommates at some point. However, after they graduated and started their own families, they grew apart. But my husband would still invite him to family events like birthday parties and such. Patrick was of a different race than us, not like it matters, but he was always friendly whenever we were around him. I never thought about him in a romantic or soul way until one day when our family was moving to a new home that we had bought. My husband and I were organizing our garage because both of us had professional jobs that kept us busy on weekdays, so we dedicated one weekend to sorting through our old belongings. Most of these items had been untouched since our college days. As I was going through my husband's things, I stumbled upon a hidden stash of 3 condoms tucked away between some old books. When I discovered those condoms, my first thought was that my husband had cheated on me back in college. I found them near his senior yearbook, and it made me believe it was solid evidence of infidelity. However, I had some doubts because they were too large for him. Additionally, during my sophomore year, when we began dating, we did use protection, but I later started using birth control, and we stopped using them altogether. The condoms were found close to his 4th-year books, which made me question the timeline even more. Despite the fact that it didn't seem to be his size, the timing added up, so I decided to have a conversation with him about what I had discovered. His reaction when I showed them to him was different from what I had expected. He chuckled and confirmed what I had already noticed. He explained that they were too big for him and that they actually belonged to his friend Patrick. He found it surprising that they were still there, preserved among the books. I asked him why he had possession of them if they belonged to his friend. He explained that it was common knowledge among his friends that this particular friend had an unusually large joystick, and they used to tease him in a friendly manner about it. One day, his friend had left them out in the open, and my husband took them as a joke to tease him later. However, he completely forgot about them. I wasn't entirely comfortable with my husband's explanation, but it did make sense. I knew he could be goofy at times, and he and his friends often engaged in harmless, playful teasing about things like this. After that incident with the condoms, I pretty much forgot all about it for a few months. But then, one evening, my husband invited his friend Patrick to join us at a sports bar for a football game. The moment I saw Patrick, I couldn't stop thinking about what my husband had told me about his size. It was like his presence ignited something in me that I had never felt before. I had never considered cheating on my husband before, but after that night at the sports bar, I couldn't get Patrick out of my mind. At that time, I was pregnant with our second child, so I tried to rationalize my feelings, thinking that maybe it was just hormones playing tricks on me. I began asking my husband more about Patrick, even though I didn't have a reason to contact him directly, and I didn't have his phone number. My husband started to notice that I was inquiring about Patrick more frequently, and I eventually stopped bringing him up. I added Patrick as a friend on Facebook and Instagram, but he didn't post much, which left me feeling somewhat frustrated. During intimate moments with my husband, it bothered me that I couldn't help but think of Patrick and that it seemed to make me come faster. After 2 or 3 months of wrestling with these thoughts and desires, I realized that what I was experiencing was not healthy. So, I made the difficult decision to unfriend Patrick on social media, even though I was too nervous to reach out to him directly. Then came the gender reveal party for our second child, and Patrick was there. Even though I was pregnant, I couldn't deny that the desire was still very much alive. I was afraid of these feelings, afraid of the possibility of falling in love with him, and terrified of exploring the deepest desires I had for him. After I had my second child, 2 important things happened that allowed me to spend more time with Patrick. First, I made the choice to be a stay-at-home mom. This meant I stayed at home to take care of our children while my husband went to work. One day, I had a doctor's appointment, and I was running late. I realized I needed someone to pick up my sons from daycare. I should have called my husband, but his job doesn't let him leave quickly because of the kind of work he does. On the other hand, Patrick had a more flexible schedule. Additionally, I had been wanting to find an opportunity to call Patrick for some time. So, I took a chance and dialed his number, not knowing whether he would agree to help or not. I told Patrick that my husband and I were currently unavailable, and he kindly offered to help. I informed the daycare about the situation, and since I had a personal relationship with the owner, they allowed Patrick to pick up my sons. Patrick also had 2 young children of his own, so my kids had a good time playing at his house while I was away. When I arrived to collect my kids, it was clear that Patrick was a bit perplexed by the whole situation. I could tell this from his body language. His wife was also present when I came to pick up my children, but I didn't feel awkward about it. After leaving his house, I sent Patrick a text message, apologizing for putting him in that position and promising that I would owe him a favor in return. He politely replied that he was happy to help, and it was his pleasure. After that day, I began a text conversation with Patrick. I mentioned how I wished I had a job that offered the kind of flexibility he had. That's how our texting friendship began. As time passed, our texts became more and more friendly. Both of us were a little hesitant to push the boundaries of our conversation, but I must admit that I was the one who often took the initiative. I encouraged him to shift our text chat to Snapchat, and he agreed. I felt nervous that his wife might read our text messages because, despite her friendly demeanor, I had noticed the way she sometimes looked at me with suspicion. One Saturday, when my husband was at work, I asked Patrick if he'd like to join me for a trip to the store because I wanted to buy some clothes. He initially declined, explaining that he didn't have a babysitter for his kids. So, I suggested that he bring his children along, and they could play with mine while we shopped. Patrick agreed to the idea, and we met up at the store. I usually prefer shopping at thrift or discount stores for used clothes because I enjoy finding good deals. I'm the type of person who collects coupons and keeps an eye out for discount sales. However, on this particular day, my primary reason for going shopping was to spend time with Patrick. I genuinely liked having him there with me because I enjoyed his company. Being next to him made me feel like a giggly schoolgirl. I couldn't control how I felt around him. Even though I never had any intention of cheating on my husband, I found myself willing to do anything he asked. He tried to be modest, but every now and then, I would come up with excuses to break the physical barrier between us. I would touch his back or arms and hold it there longer than I should have, especially when our kids were distracted. I could tell that he understood where things were heading, but what surprised me was that he didn't make any advances towards me or reject my physical contact. This encouraged me to push things further. Once we finished our shopping, he helped me with all the items I had bought. While our kids were at the back of our cars, I started feeling a bit disappointed because he wasn't making the move on me as I had expected. However, he surprised me by suggesting that he could come over and help me with the items I had purchased. It was pretty clear that I didn't really need any help, but I was thrilled when he made the offer. I tried not to accept too quickly, but eventually, I said yes. I knew that whatever he had to do needed to be quick because my husband was due to come home in about 5 hours. When we got to my house, our kids were tired, so we decided to set them up in the game room with some video games before we started moving and organizing the things we had bought. After our kids were settled in the game room, Patrick and I began unpacking the boxes of items I had purchased. I led the way, and he followed along. As we reached the bedroom, I found myself explaining to him that these were old clothes I wanted to try on to see if they still fit. I mentioned that if they didn't, I planned to get rid of them. In response, he told me that I would definitely still fit into those clothes and that I looked as sexy as I did when we first met years ago. His words ignited an overwhelming desire within me, unlike anything I had ever felt before. In that moment, I couldn't resist, and I kissed him. It's important to note that I had never been with anyone other than my husband, so the experience of having Patrick's hands on my body as we kissed was incredibly intense and soul. I had never felt as aroused and excited as I did when he began undressing me, knowing that we were about to engage in a soul encounter. I didn't love him, and what we were doing wasn't making love, it was driven by a primal desire for a purely physical act. Watching him put on protection and then becoming intimate was everything I had fantasized about and more. I had never experienced such intense passion before. It was an incredibly soul encounter, and it's hard to put into words. All the soul experiences I'd had before were filled with love, reassurance, and intimacy, but this was different. I simply wanted to have a passionate physical connection with someone who had an intense desire, and it felt absolutely incredible. I could feel his strong back beneath my hands, his lips on my neck, and it was all so amazing. I honestly can't say how many times I reached climax, or if it was one continuously, because each time I started regaining my senses, I would realize what was happening, and that would push me over the edge again. We didn't change our position during that encounter. He continued until he came, and then we both agreed to keep it a secret because we knew it could end both our marriages. After he left with his kids that day, I felt like something had been unleashed inside me. When my husband came home, I couldn't help but feel guilty, so I tried to be more intimate with him than usual. Deep down, I knew I couldn't stop what had started with Patrick. I've had sex with my husband many times since then, and I genuinely enjoy it for what it is, making love to my soulmate. But I still have cravings for Patrick, so we text each other and meet up at least once a week. To me, he was like that occasional cheat meal during a diet. I needed to be with him every week, to experience him, to feel desired as a woman. I love my husband, and this secret affair fills me with guilt, yet it also makes me feel a forbidden sense of excitement. Our affair continued for 5 months, and during that time, we attended a mutual friend's birthday party. Patrick brought his wife along, and I noticed that he was starting to distance himself from me. When I sent him text messages, it took longer for him to respond. When I finally asked him about it, he first mentioned that his wife was becoming suspicious. Then, he mentioned that he had started to feel guilty, and that he considered Patrick a friend. These explanations made me rethink our relationship because I thought that he might not be enjoying it anymore. I probably should have just left things as they were, but I couldn't resist the need for closure. So, I convinced him to meet me at a diner so we could put an end to our affair. When we met up, I learned that after the mutual friend's birthday party, Patrick's wife had confronted him because she had a suspicion, though no concrete evidence. I felt regret, wondering if something I had done at the party had given it away, perhaps unintentionally. Despite this, I persuaded him that we should have one final encounter and then part ways forever. He reluctantly agreed, and we went to a hotel to have one last intimate moment. It was an intense experience, knowing it would be our final encounter, as we didn't want to jeopardize our marriages any further. Just about 5 hours after we left the hotel, I received an ominous text message from Patrick that simply said, "She knows." Panic surged through me, and I replied, "Who knows?" "Your wife." I immediately called him, desperate for answers. Patrick informed me that his wife was in tears and heartbroken because she had concrete proof of our activities. She had evidence of us going to and leaving the diner, as well as entering and exiting the hotel. My heart sank deep into my stomach, and I couldn't help but think about what this revelation might mean for my own marriage if my husband were to find out. I asked Patrick if his wife intended to share this evidence with my husband, but he explained that he was still dealing with the turmoil in his own marriage and didn't have an answer. In my panic, I raised my voice and yelled at him, urging him to ask his wife immediately. Unfortunately, my anxiety got the best of me, and I kept getting louder. Patrick, too, became upset with me, and our conversation escalated to the point where he hung up on me. It was evident that both of us were overwhelmed and panicking. I attempted to call Patrick back, but he wouldn't answer. In my desperation, I sent him a text apologizing for raising my voice earlier. Then, I went home and found my husband in tears. He had all the evidence that Patrick had mentioned, and it was the first time I saw the devastating impact of my actions on the man I considered my soulmate. We both cried together, and I begged for his forgiveness, but he was inconsolable. My husband asked me how long the affair had been going on, and I decided to come clean about everything. I pleaded with him to forgive me and promised to seek counseling and do whatever it took to regain his trust. That day was the saddest of my life because I had never witnessed my husband cry before. I realized that not only had I betrayed his trust, but I had also done it with someone he considered a friend. We both worried about what people would say if they found out and the embarrassment it would bring to our family. It was a moment of reflection when I realized how thoughtless I had been throughout the affair and how ultimately meaningless it had been. After 2 days of trying to repair our relationship, I took the initiative to find a marriage counselor and also started seeing an individual counselor. I wanted to demonstrate to my husband that I was genuinely committed to making our marriage work. During this time, we made the difficult decision to cut Patrick out of our lives completely. My husband called Patrick and expressed his anger and disappointment. Surprisingly, Patrick took full responsibility for everything and offered sincere apologies, even when it wasn't entirely his fault. I hoped that by focusing on saving my marriage, I could help my husband, as I believed Patrick's marriage might already be beyond repair. However, after 2 weeks of trying, my husband decided that the best course of action was to have a trial separation for 3 months. During this time, we would assess our relationship and decide whether we should continue together or go our separate ways. On the very day Patrick's wife discovered his infidelity, she decided to leave him. Simultaneously, when our respective partners left us, we reached out to each other secretly, realizing that we had nothing to lose at that point. We arranged to meet up again, but unfortunately, we were unaware that Patrick's wife had been monitoring his phone and discovered our plans. She shared this information with my husband, prompting him to proceed with the divorce immediately. Patrick's wife, in a surprising turn of events, chose to return to him and began sending me threatening voice messages, demanding that I stay away from Patrick. It felt as if I had lost everything. I had lost the love of my life, as well as Patrick. I've tried to explain to my husband that I reached out to Patrick because he had left us, and I was uncertain about what to do. However, my husband is still moving forward with the divorce, regardless of my reasons. I attempted to persuade him to consider our children's well-being. I suggested that we should, at the very least, give a trial separation a chance, as he had previously promised, before proceeding with the divorce. However, he remained firm in his decision. To make matters worse, he took it upon himself to inform my family that I had been unfaithful, which I believe was unnecessary and should have remained a private matter between us. Reflecting on my actions, I acknowledge that I was in the wrong. Looking back, I deeply regret initiating the affair. Nevertheless, I still wish that he had handled the situation differently. I do feel remorse for my actions, and I yearn for the times when our relationship was simpler and more harmonious.